Okay.
We're live, Erica.
All right, great. So it is 5:30 on March 29th, and we are going to call to order the Special Education Committee. And on today's agenda, we're going to kick off with support for special education during the strategic planning process. So I'm going to let Dr. Estrella jump in and take it from here.
So thank you, Mr. Palmer. I wanted to welcome everybody today to this presentation. We've been working really hard and extensively to develop a strategic plan that really outlines all of the needs and priorities across the district. And one of those priorities, based on my conversations upon entry, was around special education and the work that we need to do to really continue to move forward with the work that has already started, but also continue to kind of reimagine what the services look like in relation to the scope of the work overall in the district. So we have today Lauren Katzman that will be engaging in a conversation with you based on the findings of the study that were completed a few weeks ago, and give you kind of an overview of the great work that has happened and the work that we need to continue to do to continue to strengthen the department and to address some of the needs and concerns that many of the parents within the special education community has brought at least to my attention and to the attention of the group that was conducting the study. But I'm also hoping that today is an opportunity for you to engage engage in a dialogue around the work, and it would be great to hear from you some of the priorities that you would like for us to highlight as we continue to engage in the strategic plan design, and also as we continue conversations with Lauren around the items of the study that we want to prioritize first, second, third, and so on and so forth, for us to continue to develop the work. So I think without further ado, I'm going to turn it over first to Yvette, so that Yvette can then formally introduce Lauren and her team.
Thank you so much. As you know, since so many of you have participated in the focus groups very intensely, we have moved forward in lots of areas. And the next phase of work, as you'll hear from Dr. Katzman, is really focusing on the integration of services across the district and supports for all kids. And this evening, we're going to be talking about students with disabilities. So it's my pleasure to formally introduce Lauren, along with the Jennifers, and she'll introduce Jennifer Baribeau, and I don't see the other Jen on the phone, but thank you. It has been great working with Lauren. We've had lots of conversations on weekends and late into the evening, and certainly all of the recommendations about what is possible for children and believing in a growth mindset is the work that we all aspire to, and it's been great working with Lauren and her team. So I turn it over to you to lead us through the next phase of this evening.
Hello, everybody in Norwalk. Nice to see most of you again. I'm out here in Arizona, so it's earlier for me. You've got myself and you've got Jennifer Baribeau on the call. Jen, raise your hand. And the other Jennifer is on vacation this week. She's in Madison, Wisconsin. So it's just going to be it is going to be the two of us. And I wanted to start by asking, I think most people here have been to at least one of these presentations. Is that accurate? Can you let me know if you have not? Let's do it that way. Anybody here not seen a presentation? Okay, so Anthony and Sandino, oh, and Emily, 3 people. Okay, for most of you who have seen this already, please stop for any questions. And for those who haven't, I'm still going to do an abbreviated version of this because we have a short amount of time. So, but ask questions, stop and ask questions as whenever you need. And this should take no more than, I think you said 20 minutes, Yvette, right?
Yeah, yes, Lauren. And then Stacy and I will facilitate
Sure.
the conversation as next steps, and please help us with that.
Okay, great. Okay, so as Yvette said, we have spent a lot of time with folks in Norwalk, weekends, evenings, text, phone calls, looking at special education across the board for the district. And we did, just going to move your faces a little bit over here. We did do a report that looks first at the CREC report. And we started there because that was the work that you guys have been embarked on for quite a few years. And we looked there to see your progress. And I will say right now that your progress in the CREC recommendations is top notch, very good. I mean, if all we were looking at were the CREC report, we would just say check, done, excellent. That was very technical work, but very strong work. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but we basically are taking you past the CREC report. So CREC report, technical work you've been doing for years. Yvette and her team have been doing an amazing job. And then we moved on. And what we moved on to was more adaptive work. So we looked more at how, not what, but how are things working? How are the collaborative structures in the district working to make sure that special education has is touching everything? So thinking about students with disabilities is throughout all of the structures of the district. What do your processes and systems look like? What does your staffing look like to meet the needs of kids with disabilities? Not just special education also. How does the staffing model work? What is your teaching and learning? What kind of services are you providing students with disabilities? Are they inclusive? Are they effective? What's your family engagement looking like? And last but not least, which covers and undergirds the entire report, what's the mindset around special education? So that was the organization that we are using. And I'm going to start us off with mindset just to frame the work the best we know how. Because special education, it is a service. It is a concept. It is law. It is advocacy. It's a civil rights legislation. So we want to make sure that it's clear what this desired mindset is when going into this work. So special education is about equity and inclusion. It's about a growth mindset, and then the details of special education. And I'll explain that a little bit more deeply. So in terms of equity and inclusion, we are looking at diversity as a positive. Disability is an aspect of diversity, and disability brings with it both positives and barriers. We want special education to be focused on equitable and inclusive practices for all students. That's our desired mindset. We want to make sure that when you're thinking of kids with disabilities, you're always thinking of growing. As your students evolve, your educators' work evolves. Everything is always in a state of evolving. And there's always a focus on raising standards and always a focus on student achievement. In many districts, the focus in special education is more aligned with compliance. We want districts to be more aligned with what is going on for your students. And in terms of special education, the goal is to minimize anything that's negative, the negative impacts of disability, and maximize opportunities. So we'll take myself, for example. I have ADHD. You want to minimize, what I have to do sitting still, thinking about one thing and then the details. You want to minimize how that affects me and maximize the fact that people with ADHD just like to think big. And so you want to use that in me. And whereas other people have the opposite. So you want to minimize any negative impacts and maximize opportunities to grow. We want to make sure that in terms of a mindset, special education is thought of as a service to students and to the district, not a place. Sometimes a service is best offered in a particular place. Most often it is not. We want to shift you from moving from that technical setting up your processes, 2, more adaptive work, and that we also want to make sure that you think about special education, that it doesn't exist in isolation. It exists as an integrated service throughout the district. And again, I'm not going to be able to see you all, and I'm actually not looking at the chats also. So if anybody wants to ask a question, maybe Yvette, you can monitor the chats and just let me know if there's a question. Okay.
I am.
Okay, so again, just we're saying we want you to, you've been focused for many years on the technical, which are more about systems. And we want you to, and that's good. You need those. That's not a bad thing, but there's been we want you to like back off a little bit and let the technical sit and let the technical grow and start thinking more about your adaptive work. What is your value and your belief around special education? Just like all the things I was just talking about, your desired mindset. We want you to focus a little bit more on that at this point, because you've got a lot of technical things in place. You don't want to lose that, but you want to grow now in an adaptive manner. What we have, oops, I missed something completely. Excuse me, I missed the whole correct thing. Give me 1 second to stop sharing because something happened here with my, give me 1 second to get back. Some things got hidden and the wrong thing got hidden. I apologize. I'm just not going to make you wait while I figure that out. So I'm just going to say to you, here it is. Sorry about that. Something happened with the correct report stuff in here. And I know that I want to make sure that you know what's working well. So let me just say, because I can pull it up here, that the correct report work, the work that you did on setting up your systems and on setting up your processes and on bringing students back from out of district and on fixing and managing your budget and on using the monies that the city gave you to bolster the work that you were doing is absolutely positively phenomenal. And Yvette, I know this is not making you happy that this slide is not on here, and I apologize profusely. I will bring it up at the end. I just don't want to waste your time while I find that slide. I pulled up the wrong, or I hid the wrong slides.
Thank you.
And I'm embarrassed, so I apologize. But and we can talk about this more in any questions you have, but the correct report work was done in a very strong manner. And Yvette's entire team is to be commended for that. And again, that's all the technical work that was done. And I apologize. I'll bring up those slides at the end when we get to the questions and answers, so I don't waste your time right now. Yvette, is there anything else you want to say about that before I go on? Okay. And again, apologies for that.
Just want to recognize the work of Stacy, the ad hoc committee, and SpedPAC, because all of that work that happened to put that decade behind Norwalk was not done by one person. It was done by a very large group of people holding hands to march forward. So I thank you all.
And again, we'll bring that up at the end. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is let you know that in each of the areas that I talked about, starting with collaborative structures, we started with a desired state. Then we went into where you were as a district, and then we went into the actions or the recommendations. And what I'm going to do here, because there's a short amount of time, is just stick with the actions or the recommendations. So you can talk about those moving forward, because that's where you are as a district. You're starting to think about those. So the collaborative structures, we want you, looking at the actions on the right here, to continue to create those integrated instructional decision-making teams, which you have started in a very intense manner in the district. And I know that's part of the restructuring of special education in the district. So we suggest that you continue so that everybody's on board. Principals are owning special education. Principals are owning the education of students with disabilities. The teaching and learning, everybody's owning it together. So there's integrated systems. We also, in terms of your collaborative structures, want you to continue to focus on accelerating the achievement of students performing below target, and focus on the students who are below, are performing below target. And then also thinking about your instructional priorities of raising those academic standards systemically throughout the district. Think carefully about creating coherence focused on those instructional priorities. So that's what we're suggesting for, in terms of your collaborative structures, your connected systems. In terms of communication, we are suggesting that the district is able to speak about priorities as a district. So we want to make sure that everybody's has a similar understanding and can speak similarly, not robotically, but be able to say similarly, this is our focus. These are our priorities. So everybody's aware. You don't have too many of them, and everybody can speak about them. And then in terms also of your collaborative structures, we know that there's a lot of special and general educators working in the same classroom together. We want to make sure that there's a pretty strong focus on how that is happening. So right now you have the technical 2 people in the classroom in many places, but how are you co-serving students? How are you co-planning? The structures are not in place for the collaborative planning or co-serving. We want to make sure that you focus on that in terms of your collaborative structures. In terms of your processes and systems, again, where you've put a lot of things in place, a lot of technical systems and structures in place. Now let's get the guidance in there. Let's understand the depth and the meat of what goes in there. And so one of our actions that we're suggesting for your processes and systems is to create clear guidance related to the provision of special ed supports and services in the student's least restrictive environment. And for those who are not special educated, who don't speak special edese, least restrictive environment means the presumed placement is a general ed classroom. Anything else must be justified. The general ed classroom never needs to be justified. So you want to focus on what's that guidance to get people there. Because again, the mindset has been special education is a place, not a service. If special education is a service, how do you start thinking about that? The second one is to develop collaborative problem-solving structures so that your SRBI system can work to meet students' needs earlier. In many districts, not just yours, you go from gen ed to special ed, not much in between, not much problem solving around students, but there's a lot of student problem solving that can be done that has nothing to do with whether or not a student has a disability. It just has to do with everything that's being taught in every classroom in every school across the country. There's a foundational teaching, and then there's always the need for more supports. How do you create those structures so you can always have that process in place to support? In terms of the third bullet, there is return to basics of the reevaluation process. Right now, we found in Norwalk that the reevaluation process was kind of pro forma. There was a lot of testing going on, but testing is important and assessment is important, but not every student needs all the same assessments. Not every student needs all assessments. And for reevaluations, not every student has to have assessments. So there's different levels of thinking about this. For a reevaluation, you must assess whether or not there are assessments needed. So there was a lot of conversation about staff having too much on their plate, but there were also some systems in place that just kind of required people to do maybe more assessments than might be appropriate for the student all the time. So it's just something to look at individually per student. The last one here is to assure that all students receive equitable resources regardless of their family's ability to employ advocates and/or lawyers. What we know and what seemed to be a common theme is that if you had those resources, if the family had those resources, they were better equipped to get the resources from the district than if the family didn't have those resources. And we want it to be, your family has or does not have resources, the student or their child should get the same exact thing. So what are the processes in place so you don't need to have those advocates or lawyers to get what you need, or it's less often. On the transitions, we're still talking about processes and systems. The transition from program to program or from grade span, so kindergarten to first grade or elementary school to middle or middle to high school, those transition times for students with disabilities getting services, it seemed like there were processes in place, but those processes weren't always followed. So how to make that transition time for students with disabilities more seamless using the processes that you have. Again, what's the gut in there? What is the meat of those processes? In terms of those, the implementation of your priorities, again, there's lots of great things going on in Norwalk. There's the literacy center, there's the co-teaching, there's Nest, ASD Nest, there's all sorts of amazing pieces in there, but the meat of those implementation was not fully realized in all of the different programs and all the different services. There were a lot of great things. Now it's like, let's just stop and look and put that meat in there. What's the capacity that needs to be built? How do you sustain them? How does everybody understand all of the functions of these different programs? Again, the structure's there. Now let's build it out. And this is one model of looking at processes and systems. Initiation to implementation to institutionalization. There was a lot of initiation of different programs in Norwalk. And there was a start of implementation, but there was really not a lot of institutionalization that we saw. So how does it get built and owned and just become part of the district? So we wanted to see more of that. And the last thing for processes and systems here would be around resources and data. So with the resources, we found there were resources within the district, but there was not a system that allowed people to get all the resources they needed or to even know what was out there. And I'm going to connect this to your MTSS process that's being built in the district. As the MTSS process is being built, and you've got your toolkit of resources and different services and different what's the right word I'm thinking of? Interventions. Then as that toolkit is being built out, it's going to become clearer what resources are out there and more systemic and more. There's going to be more professional development around them. So I think the resources will get ironed out more as the MTSS process gets ironed out more. And then the last thing in terms of processes would be your data. I think that's the last thing. Let's see. Am I lying here? Nope. So the data system you have, and I know this has been discussed a few times, you have data systems that are special ed and general ed, and they don't always talk. And I know that the district is aware of that. So while you have data, those systems need to be able to talk so you can actually use that data more substantively. I'm going to skip this Q&A for now just because of our time, unless somebody has a question they want to make sure they ask right now. Okay. And I'm going to go on to the staffing. In terms of our recommendations with staffing, is that there's clear roles and responsibilities that are developed. There were some overlap in staffing responsibilities, and there was some duplication because there was a special ed person here, a gen ed person here doing somewhat similar things. We want to make sure that the roles and responsibilities of the gen ed teachers who are working with the special ed teachers are cleared. The roles and responsibilities for the special ed supervisors and what say they can or cannot have is clear. Where's the principal's role? So those roles just need to be clarified and really connected to the vision of the district. What is the vision of special education for the district? That's how you create your roles and responsibilities. We suggest that you have consistent district-wide time for collaboration between gen ed and special ed. Again, you have gen ed teachers and special ed teachers in class together without planning time. They need planning time, and it can't be, before they get to school or in the hall. The best way to do this is to have a district-wide requirement that there is some sort of planning time. We're suggesting with staffing, one way to ease their amount of work is to do away with some of the paperwork redundancies they have. And there are some that are some fairly potentially low-hanging fruit, but paperwork takes up a lot of time. So we want to think about eliminating some of their paperwork redundancies. And also for the staff, particularly the related service providers, speech and language, etc., that when they are out or they're in a professional development meeting or they're running a meeting, they have to make up that time as opposed to having some coverage for them so they don't have to make up that time, because it's physically impossible to do a whole job and then to make up for part of the time that you're doing other parts of your whole job. Also for staffing, again, we want, in terms of like your caseload, there was a lot of conversation around what should be the caseload number. We're going to back away from that caseload number and say, what is the workload? What are your priorities? Base it on that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a number, but it needs to be clear. People need to know how it's being decided, and it needs to be based on your vision for the work. You want to support collaboration. You want to shift to prioritize the planning over the teaching, shift to prioritize the co-serving. We want to suggest that you base it on a formula of sorts, but a flexible formula. And we also want to suggest that you think about shifting some of the paraprofessionals that you hire to maybe teachers that you hire, because rule of thumb is, I mean, a teacher has more expertise than a paraprofessional, no matter the human being. You have some paras that are stronger than teachers in reality, but the point is, if you just look at their education level and their qualifications, there's a lower qualification in a para than there is as a teacher. And those paras are often teaching or supporting the student with the most complex needs in the district. So just using that logic, think about how you can use more teachers than paras sometimes, when appropriate. And we also know that one-to-one paras is not an effective practice. So there's research to support moving in that direction. In terms of keeping your staff, which has been an issue, you want to build those collaborative teams. Adults like to work together. It's more fulfilling. It's more it's more of a positive experience, and you have more success. You want to connect new special ed staff with mentors in their field, because a lot of times it seemed like the mentorship was just check, we got a mentor, as opposed to connecting the right people. And what are your exit interviews saying to you? Why are you losing staff? So look closely at those exit interviews. I'm going to skip this, and I'm going to, unless anybody here, let's see, how much time do we have, Yvette? Am I running out of time?
About 5-7 more minutes if we want to have a facilitated
We
conversation.
definitely want you to have a facilitated conversation. So I'm going to skip the data part. So I'm going to fly through this. So those people who didn't hear this presentation before, I'm sure you can have access to this and you can see the data. So I'm going to just kind of fly through it so you know what's in there, and then keep going. So we have your rate of kids with disabilities in the district, which is not an issue at all. You're fairly similar across the board with the state and the country. And please stop me if you need me to say some more about this. Your rates of kids with disabilities in different disability categories is similar-ish, except, well, similar-ish. We won't go too far into that. Your rates across different racial groups, you have a higher rate of kids who are Black or African American. That's something to look at, because you have a disproportionate representation of students who are Black or African American classified, and that is not okay. I want to point you to the fact that Dr. Eddie Fergus has done work on disproportionality, and there's a tool, and we want you to use that tool. And we had made some suggestions on how to broaden the scope of this tool so you could actually get more information around special education. But thinking about disproportionality, think about using this tool that's already available to you. You do have a higher percentage of students who are English learners classified as having a disability. So again, we're going to call that an overrepresentation. You're overclassifying kids who are English language learners as having a disability, and Black and African American English language learners do not have more disabilities than anybody else. They're just overclassified. Let's see, we'll skip that for a moment. These are your preschoolers. Your preschoolers, you can see that over here that the types of disabilities they're classified with, that's fairly typical. Your boy versus girl, your female versus male, that's not appropriate, but very typical across the country. This is the one to look at here. Your pre-K kids getting special ed services, over half of them are Latinx students. That may be leading to your disproportionality problem of students who are overrepresented in special education later on as well. Your academic achievement, you can see that the red bars are kids with disabilities and the yellow are kids without. You can just take a peek and you can see that it's much, much, much lower. That gap is big. You want to close that gap. If special education is doing the work it needs to do, it should be closing that gap. Kids with disabilities can succeed as their peers without disabilities can, at least the vast majority of them. A small minority of students with disabilities have cognitive disabilities. And for those students, you might see that gap. But it's about 15% of the kids with disabilities. So it's about 1 to 2% or 2-ish% of your kids, not this large. And again, this is not just Norwalk. This is, all too common, but special education should be what's leveling that playing field. And it's not here. So looking at teaching and learning, looking at your actions, we want to first suggest that you and we know you're focusing on this, and this first suggestion is not special education. This is your district, your universal instruction. That's what you're focusing on, your tier 1 in your MTSS model, that foundational structure. Continue to develop that. And the research will tell us that you want to make sure you're developing it with academics and SEL or social emotional learning combined, because one will support the other. You want to make sure that as you're developing that foundational work, special education expertise is inputted in there and throughout. If you have these 3 tiers, special education is not its own tier, it's throughout. Providing professional development on that universal instruction. And you have a very large number of students who are English learners in the district. So we're just saying here, again, this is not special education. So these are just ideas that to focus on language acquisition as a district is great. It would help kids with and without disabilities, kids who are and who are not English learners. Then moving to your SRBI or your interventions, assure again that your SRBI process includes academics and social emotional learning. Assure that special education is built into that. It's not its own thing. Special education does not have its own lane. It does not have its own curriculum. It's got supports within. And develop your processes and interventions on explicit skill development and progress monitoring. So a lot of disability for kids is in the skill level, not in the cognitive level. So students who are classified as learning disabled or dyslexic, you have a dyslexia category in Norwalk and in Connecticut, that's skill, that's not cognition. So you want to make sure that you're focusing a lot on skills. And you want to make sure that you're monitoring what you're doing to see if it's working. This is all not special education. Special education is built within. It's a service to this. And then within your special education, just thinking about that, again, reimagining it as a service rather than a place. Developing those services with the goal of improved student outcomes, nothing else. Not nothing else, but that's got to be the first thing. And then everything follows that. Your explicit improved student outcomes comes first. Everything else follows that. All of your compliance indicators should be supporting that. Focus on the development of special education on skill development versus program development. So we want to focus on what does the student need. Build the capacity of principals to lead for success for students with disabilities. Consider students, what do they have to say? Students will tell you a lot of what they need if they're asked. Focus the IEPs on disability-related needs and meeting grade level standards. A lot of the IEPs that we looked at had everything in it. Special education does not need to be everything. It needs to be what is the disability affecting and what do we need to do? If a student has dyslexia, for example, they don't need us, they need accommodations for science and history. They don't need special education necessarily for science and history. They need accommodations to get there, but they may need special education services to decode, to learn how to decode. and continue to develop and expand your transition services for students who are 18 to 22. Moving on, your educational environment, we want you to focus on providing more inclusive opportunities. Gen Ed, the more a student is in Gen Ed, I think I put this, let me just make sure I put this slide in here, yeah. So let me come here. The more a student is in general education, the better they are, period. So let me just say this. This does not mean 100% of the time. It just says the more time. So what's on this slide is a study of over 11,000 students. This is the second time it was done, and Congress has required this study twice. So it's a national study called NLTS, National Longitudinal Transition Study. And it tells you that the more time students with disabilities spend in the gen ed class, the higher their scores on reading and math, fewer absences, fewer referrals for disruptive behaviors, better outcomes after high school and employment and independent living, no matter their disability label, the severity of their disability, their gender, or their family's socioeconomic status. And I'm hoping when they do this study a third time that they'll add race in there, which they haven't in the past. But the more time a student spends in the gen ed class and the services come there, that doesn't mean a kid sits in the back with a special ed teacher. That means the services are built in. The better they do. And then I will say the other thing to think about is to focus on decreasing suspensions of students with disabilities. Sorry. And one other thing to say, I'm sorry, in terms of this research, a lot of times people look at this research and think, oh, that's good for most kids, but not for kids with significant disabilities. No studies have been conducted since the 1970s that have shown an academic advantage for students with intellectual and other developmental disabilities educated in separate settings. So kids with significant disabilities still, they need to be in inclusive classrooms. I am going to say that, let's look here real quick. If you look here at this red line shows you how much time or how much a student spends in the gen ed classroom most of their days. So an intellectual disability here, down here, kids with intellectual disabilities in Norwalk, 15% of students in Norwalk spend 80% or more of their day in the regular class. If you go up here, speech and language impairment, 90% of students in Norwalk who are classified with a speech and language impairment spend 80% or more of their day in the regular class. If you remember the study I just showed you, it works for all students. So you want to see most students have most of their time in the regular class. The national norm is going to be around 60 something, so right around here. And so the students with speech and language impairment, learning disability, OHI, or other health impairment, that's okay, but you want to work on students with autism, emotional disturbance, multiple disability, and intellectual disability, getting them more in the gen ed class in Norwalk. And I am going to skip these as well. And also talk about the fact that while you have students in the gen ed class or in a special ed class, we want to look at how often are kids in school. This is looking at absenteeism. So you can see that students with a disability, 26% of them are chronically absent or were chronically absent 10 days or more, which is a lot. 20% of the overall population. You know that you have this as an issue in your district, and it's more of an issue if you pull out kids with disabilities. It's a higher percent of an issue. Again, with suspension, more students with disabilities are suspended than students without disabilities. You want to be careful of that and not suspending students because they have a disability. And if you look at it, the kids who are being suspended are kids classified with an emotional disturbance. If they have an emotional disturbance, then obviously behavior is part of their disability. Are they being suspended because of their disability is a question that you want to be able to answer and not practice. Oops. Sorry. Let me go here real quickly. And I'm almost done, Yvette. 2 minutes and I'll be done. Okay. Rushing along here. Family engagement. We know that family engagement is extremely important for all students. It's even more important for families of kids with disabilities. There's a bigger more need for more connection and more communication. So we know that you have spent a lot of time, the special ed team has connecting with families. Just continue to build on those connections, and educate families for what they need. There's a lot of thinking. We found that a lot of families wanted more meant better, but more special education services don't always mean better. You want to not pull kids out of the class as much as possible. You want to keep them in the gen ed class as much as possible. So what is the point of special education? It's not for everything, it's for targeted pieces. So there's some education that's needed. And also educating all families on their rights and responsibilities. So there's a level playing field of families who have that political knowledge to be able to say, hey, so there'll be less of an imbalance of who brings in advocates and lawyers, but everybody should know their rights. And then that all should level out some. And then when those services when your services are of a higher quality, as they continue to grow in quality, then you want to start pushing back on some of these, on the advocates and some of the lawyers when they don't have, when the argument is an old argument. When the argument becomes an old argument, you want to then start being able to get ready to say, no, we are doing a good job here. And then again, ending with mindset. You want to build your equity inclusion. You want to build the focus on equity inclusion. Create structures that focus decisions on equity and inclusive practices for kids with disabilities. You want to build that growth mindset. We're always going to raise those academic standards for students with disabilities. You're always going to assume the best, presume competence. And in terms of special education, you want to think of it as, again, as a service, not a place, and embrace disability as diversity and create opportunities for accessing the curriculum and the school experience all students in Norwalk should have. And now I am done. And I will just say that this is just what we were talking about with presuming competence. You want to just assume that a student can do it. And if they can't, assume that the instruction needs to shift, not the student. The student is the student. It's our adult responsibility to instruct as best we can. And I am going to stop there and let you take questions. And then, Yvette, I'm going to pull up the stuff from the correct that I didn't have up here, and apologize again for that. So I will stop there. And Yvette, there you are. I'll let you take over.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I've every time I've heard the presentation, I've reinforced that there isn't a special ed leader in the nation that would not agree with the aspirations and the desired state that Lauren has put before us to work towards. So thank you for that. We shared, yes?
If I could just comment quickly before we jump into the Jamboard. So this committee knows that this presentation has been done now 3 times over. And since we initially got the results of this study, so much has already been put into motion. And, I want to give Dr. Estrella and Yvette and the larger team credit for that. So examples of that are Dr. Estrella has built into her budget those SRBI supports that were recommended out of this study, data supports, and I'll let her comment on that. And she made sure in the review of a consultant for our multi-language learner program moving forward that I was included as part of that committee, and I will be included now as part of the curriculum committee going forward. So as we looked at who we were going to select for our multi-language learner program review, that special education was included in the comments and the assessment for that vendor. So that, Dr. Estrella, I don't know if you want to comment on some of the things that you've already built in, to the budget recommendation.
So one of the things that, Mr. Palmer articulated, we are looking to bring in an SRBI director that will really focus on creating a really robust SRBI system. One of the things that I heard from many of the parents that are receiving special education services is that it took a long time for their child's disability to be identified. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that we don't really have a systemic SRBI system in the district. So one of the things we're hoping to do in bringing in a director is to build those structures and systems in the district so that we can either have early identification or early intervention so that we don't over-refer into special education for things that can easily be addressed in tier 1 and 2 instruction and not have to engage in a situation that we're now creating an IEP because the child didn't get the intervention services that they needed early on to avoid then needing more intensive interventions later on. And in terms of multilingual learners, across the nation, you see that there's an overclassification, especially for language and speech impairment. And a lot of that is associated with either not having students in adequate programs that service their language developmental needs, and then they are misdiagnosed with having a language disability. When in reality, it has been a lack of adequate services being provided for their language development. So one of the things that we're doing is we're bringing in a consultant to support us in looking at our programs, but also building capacity amongst the folks that are providing the services, and also looking at the possibility of expanding programs because we have such a large multilingual population in the district. And we also have a lot of students that, although they've learned how to speak English, are still heritage speakers. And that in itself requires a differentiated approach in how we teach language, and particularly teaching English as a second language in our program. Also, in terms of our data systems, one of the things that we're trying to do is build in a data and analytics team that will help our teachers make informed decisions. Right now, we're looking at partnering with philanthropy around this project. And it's something that I'm hoping that we can build into the core table of organization. So you will see a lot of shifts happening in the table of organization as a result of the conversations and feedback that we've gotten from the strategic plan, but also a lot of the studies and the information that they have outlined that we need to prioritize in our work. So, and one of which is the merger of specialized instruction into curricula, so that we make sure that teachers, one, are working collectively and collaboratively together, but that most importantly, that our special education teachers are not working in isolation from the rest of the school unit, and that they see themselves as an integral component of the school and not a separate program within the school. But then most importantly, that it lends itself to the possibility of enabling collaboration amongst principals and amongst principals, teachers, and most importantly, special education teachers and teachers in the general education setting. Also, with that, in terms of that joining of forces, Yvette is going to be working with us to make sure that we streamline that process, and that we, in a scaffolded way, move towards the joining of special education into curriculum and instruction, so that people see it as a service and not a permanent placement. Having things separated the way that we have it now, it gives the illusion that one's in special education, always in special education, when in reality, special education should be a service that helps the child build the skills that they need so that they can then work effectively in a general education setting with the rest of their peers, and they learn the adequate scaffolds that they need to maximize their learning experience. But the way that it's structured right now, it's very separate and apart, and doesn't really solicit the opportunity of providing the services to eventually build the child's capacity to then mainstream into the general education classroom. And, you know, I always use the analogy of how we live in the world. We don't live in, at least we hope not to live in segregated pockets. So we don't want to create a situation in the school environment where students, because of the service that they're receiving, then are segregated into pockets versus being part of the whole unit and getting what they need where it's necessary. So within the conversation, some of the things we're also going to look at is flexible programming, because you might have students that might need services in literacy, but don't necessarily need it in mathematics, or might need services in mathematics and literacy, but not necessarily needed in science and social studies or the arts. So we want to make sure every opportunity that we can have students in the main, what I call mainstreaming, which is in a general education setting, that we provide those opportunities, because all the research shows that students succeed best when they are with their gen ed peers. So in every opportunity that we can, we want to make sure as we think through the work ahead that we provide those opportunities for our students when they're ready and with the adequate scaffolds that they need to be successful.
Thank you, Superintendent. We were going to walk you through 3 Jamboard slides. We have about 10 minutes left. So Erica, I'm going to suggest that we put out there the Jamboard slides, but really have a facilitated conversation. So what I'm going to ask, if you've looked at the Jamboard, there were 3 questions. And can I share screen? Yes, I can. For those of you that are familiar with a Jamboard, if you start with your pen and move down to the sticky note, you can just press it once and write a note, and it saves, and there it is. So what we're asking you to do is take 5 minutes, because that's really all we have left. And Erica, perhaps we can come back to this at the next committee meeting. But we want to know what parts of the report resonated with you. What spoke to you and said, gee, I was hoping somebody would say that. We want to know, if anything, what surprised you in the report, and what, from your perspective, should be our priority steps. And your input will inform us. So I'm going to ask that you take the next 4 minutes. I'll set that timer. If you can each put in a comment, I'll give you that time, and then we'll come back and we'll look at this together. Please note that this is being live streamed, so please do not put personal comments or anything that you would not want the public to see. Certainly protect your own child or your own family's confidentiality here. We're really looking to you for that big picture. So I'm going to set the timer and we'll come back in 4 minutes. Stacy and I will go through the Jamboard, and then I'll turn it back to Erica to complete the meeting. Lauren, thank you so much. Can everyone see the thumbs up if you can see the Jamboard? Amy, can you see it? And just try the sticky note, if everyone can just try one, and let me know if you cannot utilize it. If you want to put something in the chat board, I can write a sticky note, or Stacy can write the sticky note for you if for some reason you didn't download. So here we go. It is 6:26, and we'll come back at 6:30 and summarize very quickly.
Hey, Yvette, it's Marissa. Erica's just texting me. Are you able to unmute her?
I don't see why not. Um, Roland, can you unmute Erica?
I'm trying to do that now.
Thank you.
How you doing, Erica? Okay. Erica, are you on?
Yeah,
Okay,
she's looks like she's unmuted herself.
excellent. So Stacy, perhaps you want to just sort of summarize the first slide there, see what we got?
Sure. Um, so I think one of the big things, growth mindset. I also saw on here, I think twice, that special education is a service, not a place. I think that's a really big techie way. That was one of mine that I put up there as well. And we want to really make sure that we're providing the support. So we have the SPED teachers need more planning time with co-teachers, mapping initiatives to ensure the aspects of everything being completed, focusing on the transition process. So it's really looking at how are we now taking our systems a bit further to make sure the things that we have the structure, as Lauren had said, how do we really implement that? So co-teaching is really good. We know that we have the staff. How do we now dig that deeper and, not just say, oh, it's that we have two teachers, but they're really co-planning. We're giving them the time and that they're going to be able to, I like that part of the slide where it says it's part of the institution. We want it to become part of Norwalk and really be known for good co-teaching that we're doing. And I know like Emily's part of a team, the ASD Nest. We, really invested that time in that, and we want to make sure that that is something that we can do across. I don't know if you want to go to slide 2.
Yep. Anybody have a final comment before I move to slide 2?
This is Eric. I just want to let you know that being technically challenged, I put some comments in the chat.
Thank you. I have to stop sharing and then I'll share that out.
So sorry, Yvette.
I can't get to the chat until I stop sharing. And Eric, you and I are going to have a pre-teaching conference soon.
Much needed.
Okay, so the second is what surprised you. So Stacy, you want to summarize that?
Sure. I was trying to get to Eric's comments to cut and paste, but I'll go back. So one of the surprises was the hiring more paras versus with the teachers. And I think that I see
It's
that
a reverse.
That it's really important that we have more teachers than paras. Not that our paras don't do a wonderful job. They are excellent at working with students. And I think as Lauren said, this isn't anything about them, but as we ensure having highly trained staff working with our students, making sure we have that. And then that really kind of looks at how do we address some of those academic gaps of our special ed students versus our gen ed students. The data is very wide and surprising that we need to be really working hard to be raising the academic achievement of the students. The other is the compliance and documentation, and the specialists having the paperwork. Those and making up time. Those kind of go hand in hand. The compliance and documentation is a priority for parents. They want to know that services are being provided. They want logs, but then on the other hand, specialists are having to do double the work. So I think really looking at systematically within our district, how can we address both? We can't just leave it there. What can we do differently to ensure that parents can see what's going on, and how do we not have staff do double the work?
Erica, I see you on now. Can I go to the last frame?
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. So the highest priorities here, talking about customized assessments, appropriate classification issues. The issue is the appropriate identification of students with dyslexia and assisting general education teachers to more fully and deeply accommodate and ensure the equity of access and opportunity for kids with disabilities in the general ed classroom, and the issue about the contentious PPTs, and that we should be building a system where there is equal level playing field for all families. And believe me, we would love to cut down on the time that we're spending in PPTs because there are legal issues that should not need to take up hours around a PPT table. And for me, the other major issue is the principals needing to take the responsibility for ensuring that all of the kids in their building are receiving equitable and fair services and services that they need in the least restrictive environment. So with that, I'm going to try to stop sharing. Erica, I think this may be a discussion that we can continue. Our time is short. So I'm going to close that out, and I'm going to close out my email also. And I'm going to try to stop sharing and turn it back to you, Madam Chair. We can't hear you, Erica. You're breaking up, Erica. I'm going to move the agenda forward. Erica, if you can hear me, hear us, perhaps just text me, or if you want to call in to the meeting. I know that there is a report from NSPEDPAC, so let me turn that over to Amy quickly.
So we are busy in SPEDPAC. We have divided into two different teams. We have one team focusing on communications. The other team is focusing on IEP compliance, specifically integrating some data systems, as well as consistency across the board for IEPs. And we are working on our report, which we will present to the Board of Ed probably June, July.
And we will work to get that on the agenda with the superintendent. This week is Light the Town Blue in honor of the recognition, going beyond awareness. Lauren, I can't help but think of living in an anti-ableist world where we're actually not just aware and accepting, but really into the appreciation of the uniqueness that each individual brings. And the lighted up blue is on the gazebo on the green on April 1st at 7 o'clock. Lots of advertisement and social media is carrying that. The news will be there. Fire trucks and police cars for the kids will be socially distanced, or at least physically distanced and socially connected. And I want to thank Jeff Spar for his continued advocacy in this area, and we hope that you all can join us. Yes, Kelly, March is Down Awareness Month. There is a great short public service announcement done by Sting about paying it forward and employment. If you have not seen it, it is truly remarkable how folks with Down syndrome, one person gets hired and then an attorney sees that person in the bakery and the attorney hires someone and so on. It's just again, the world that we would like to be living in. Erica, I don't know if you can hear me to move further.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Thank you, Lauren, for putting that in the chat.
Yeah. So what I had said before was there was no public comments, and I need to table the minutes because I'm the only board member here. So with that, do you want to touch on Twilight, or do you want to table that for next time?
Let me speak to it in 3 sentences. We recognize that there were students, not necessarily students with IEPs, who we could not engage in attendance in the past. In the past 13 months, and we recognize that perhaps they were the only people working in their home during the COVID pandemic. Perhaps they were taking care of younger siblings when daycare or other schools closed. We created a Twilight Academy running from 5 to 9. It's in person. Thank you to the superintendent for saying it's a great idea, run with it. And we found the resources to do it. We're leading with SEL because we recognized that these kids, thank you, Marissa, that these kids just were unengaged and we needed a safe space for them. We didn't know who would show. Within 2 weeks, 28 students appeared, and we have rolling admissions, and they are engaging and dedicated to completing coursework, putting them back on track towards graduation. And we prioritized juniors and seniors so that we could put them on track for graduation. So I'll bring more information, but we are really pleased. And we're running program at Norwalk High School in the evening. That's that report, Erica.
Thank you. I think that we hit on everything. Did we miss anything on the agenda? I think we got it, right?
Other than the minutes.
Other than the minutes, yeah, which we got a table. We only ran 11 minutes late. So thank you everybody for hanging in. And thank you so much again for all your work on the RFP. And to Sarah Lemieux, who guided this committee before I got here and through all those technical implementations, and everybody in the specialized learning department with Yvette at the helm. Such great work and such great work to come. And thank you, Dr. Estrella, for already taking us off in the right direction. So with that, I think we can call for an adjournment. Well, I guess I'm the only person here, so I guess we can adjourn.
Thank you all. Roland, if you can stop recording, that would be great.